Okay, good afternoon and a very warm welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Sandra Jack Malik. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Education at Cape Breton University. I teach English language arts method courses to Bachelor of Education students. So these are folks that are going to end up in your children's classrooms. And I also sit on the board of Dyslexia Canada. Today I'm coming to you from Trenton, Ontario. I know that there are going to be people coming from all over Ontario and all of Canada. Here in Trenton, this is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Huron-Wendat and Iroquois. This territory is covered by the Williams and Upper Canada treaties. I would like to begin this event. Dyslexia Canada is using assistive technology to create an inclusive classroom by acknowledging we are, in fact, meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. I'd also like to say that on the bottom of the screen, excuse me, you will see a Q&A that you can use, and Dr. Power will take questions throughout. I'm very happy today to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Rob Power. He and I work together at Cape Breton University. We were so fortunate and so profoundly grateful to have him through this transition from moving all of our courses from face-to-face delivery to online. Rob was more than helpful. So Dr. Power is an assistant professor of education at Cape Breton University. He has taught courses in instructional design for online learning, instructional design for mobile learning, digital learning tool design, educational technology integration, technology curriculum, and data analysis for educational support. His research interests include instructional design for online learning, mobile learning, teacher self-efficacy with digital technology integration, and instructional design to support digital accessibility. Dr. Power's research has been published in national and international journals. He has also served as a past president of the International Association for Mobile Learning, as the conference chair for the World Conference on Mobile and Contextual Learning Series, and as an editor for national and international research textbooks. I'm delighted today to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Rob Power.
Thank you for the introduction, Sandra. And I will get my slides ready to present here now. I'm just going to share my screen and get started.
Thanks, Rob.
Oh, I do not have host status anymore, Christine. Okay, perfect. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen here now. And what happened to my presentation? I had it presenting, but that stopped. Okay. There we go. So you should be seeing my slides there now. And I would like to welcome everyone to this presentation on using assistive technology to create an inclusive classroom. And I'm just going to turn on an audience tool here right now. So you should be seeing a little link at the top. So in addition to the Q&A link at the bottom of the Zoom window where you can send questions that Sandra and Christine can monitor, you could also send them to me using that link that you're seeing at the top of the slide. And they'll pop up on my little presenter tool here now, so I can stop and answer some of those at an appropriate point. So just as Sandra did, I would like to start off this meeting by doing a little bit of a land acknowledgement here. And this is the land acknowledgement that we typically place in our course outlines at Cape Breton University. So I would like to acknowledge that Cape Breton Island, where I'm currently presenting from, is Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So I'm going to start off now by just giving you a little bit of background on my perspective on this topic. I'm not just coming at you here today as a technology expert or tech guru or anything like that. First and foremost, I'm speaking to you today as a father. I have 3 children, 2 of whom have been diagnosed with either physical or learning disabilities or both. I'm also coming at you as an experienced educator. I have been teaching now since 2001. My first week of teaching actually was the week of 9/11. So kind of a trial by fire there in terms of using technology to connect with my students and their families. And I'm also coming to you as someone who has well over a decade of experience as a formal instructional designer and instructional developer, designing, building, and helping others to build technology-based resources to connect with their students and their families, and to make the most out of it and be as inclusive as possible for everyone involved. So I would like to point out, with my first perspective, dealing with my own children, I like to look at them, I'm sure as most of us do, as individuals first. So my 2 children in this case, Katie and Alex, they are children who are managing specific learning disabilities or physical disabilities, and they're doing quite well with it. I don't like to think of them in terms of their conditions first. I don't like to discuss them in terms of their conditions first when I'm dealing with their teachers or trying to resolve their problems and trying to make things more inclusive for them in their day-to-day experiences. One of the reasons why I don't like to do that is because if you look at, say, Katie first, who has been diagnosed with dyslexia, you're going to see the dyslexia first. You're not going to see what an intelligent person she is. You're not going to see what a great personality she has. You're not going to see all of the strengths that she brings to the classroom and to working with her peers. And you might actually misinterpret the problem. Most people, when they're not experienced dealing with this in their own families, they think of dyslexia, they think you can't read properly, which is not the case at all. My daughter has absolutely no problems reading, never has. Her reading ability has always been off the charts. And she's dealing with issues with encoding of information and translating it from her brain to paper as opposed to when she's reading. So if you think of the condition first and just the name of it, you might end up getting yourself trapped in terms of thinking of stigmas or misconceptions, and that could end up causing problems with trying to make the most inclusive environment possible for her and for all of her classmates. Likewise with my son. My son Alex has got a really spirited personality. He's a really fun child to be around, but he is dealing with muscular dystrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And if you think of his condition first, you might end up thinking of seeing the wheelchair that he sometimes uses first. Or you might end up thinking that he's just a really lazy or really tired child and he never speaks to any of the adults in the classroom. And you might end up completely misunderstanding the issues that you're dealing with. So like all of us, I think I like to think of the child first and then any issues that they're dealing with. The same would go with any child that we're dealing with in our classrooms, or in my case with adult students in my classrooms. They all bring unique conditions, unique circumstances to the classroom, and they all have unique challenges to overcome. And for my daughter Katie and for my son Alex, it's the same thing. They just have their own unique challenges that they need to overcome. So it's just one of the things that I as a teacher or I as a parent would work through with them. And these are the reasons why I mostly want to deal with using technology to create inclusive classrooms, because I have that firsthand experience with it and I see what an impact that it can have. So I like to leverage my experience as a teacher. I like to leverage my experience as an instructional designer to make as inclusive a classroom as possible for my son, for my daughter, and for any student that I'm dealing with. But there are lots of other reasons besides these physical disabilities or these diagnosed learning disabilities why we want to create an inclusive classroom and why we want to leverage technology to do that. So Some of those reasons could be the disabilities that I mentioned, but they might not be diagnosable disabilities per se. Maybe it's socioeconomic imbalances that some of our students are facing, or some of the communities that we're working with are facing, that can create barriers for our students, and where we can use technology to help our students overcome those barriers and feel as included as possible with their classmates and with their cohorts right across the country. Or it could be cultural issues. They might have different cultural perspectives or come from different parts of the world and speak different languages. All of these are reasons why we can leverage technology and make the classroom more inclusive for students, and help not think about some of the traditional stigmas that our students might be facing. I like to think of this particular cartoon that I once first saw years ago. And when I was talking to Sandra and Christine about this a couple of weeks ago, I mistakenly attributed it to Gary Larson. It does sort of remind me of his work, but it's not. It's not a Far Side comic. This is one, I believe, that a teacher had originally drawn back in 2002. And in this picture, you can see that there's a gentleman who's shoveling the steps after a snow day. Lots of children waiting to get up the steps, and one poor child in a wheelchair waiting to get up the ramp. The child asks the gentleman to clean the ramp for him so he can get up. He says, well, I'll get to that. I'm going to get these steps first. Let all these other kids are waiting to get in. And the child points out, if you shovel the ramp, everyone can get in. And that is one of my biggest inspirations with using technology and designing learning resources for my students, and by extension, their families and anyone else that they're connected with. If you put these tools in place and make them available for everybody, it just makes life easier for everybody, and you're not singling out any one student. You can do these things already. You can make life easier. You don't have to worry about trying to put in accommodations later on if you discover that you have a student who needs something specific, because you've already got it there. You've already got the ramp cleared, and you can get them in. Which brings me to another distinction that I want to make here. The distinction between talking about an accommodation versus a modification. When I talk about shoveling the ramp to let all students get in, excuse me, using that ramp as opposed to going up the stairs, this is, for me, an accommodation for a student. And I'm making that accommodation available to all students. I'm not changing anything about the course itself. I'm simply providing them with ways to make it a little bit easier for them to access the same opportunities and to be as included as possible. When we talk about modification, when we're dealing with schools and with teachers, and forgive me if I use the wrong term here because I've been in so many different jurisdictions lately, but if we're talking about an IEP or an ISSP or an ESP, or different jurisdictions call them different things. So the educational support plans that we put in place for our students. Accommodations mean we're going to provide supports to that student, but they're going to be included and they're going to continue on in the same classroom and working on the same challenges, the same materials that their colleagues are working on. When we talk about modifications, we're actually talking about changing something about the course because we know that there's something that this particular student cannot handle. So when I talk about making an inclusive environment, I'm more specifically looking at accommodations. I want to try and make it as easy as possible for all students to get in through the door into the same classroom, as opposed to getting into different rooms, and to be able to collaborate with each other. So I want to bring up one other point here. I mentioned this word a few minutes ago, talking about some of the challenges that our students face and some of the reasons why we want to use technology in a way that is as inclusive as possible. What about the perspectives of the students themselves when you try to use technology-based tools as an accommodation for them? Yes, those tools can help them overcome some of their challenges. For instance, a child with dyslexia like my daughter could use a Chromebook with Google Read and Write or with Drag and Dictate if necessary, some kind of speech-to-text engine installed on it to help them overcome some of the challenges that they face because of dyslexia. Well, how does that student feel if they are the only one who's using that technology? Or likewise, my son Alex, in addition to his muscular dystrophy, he has an anxiety disorder, and that manifests itself in the form of selective mutism. When he's working with his friends, when he's playing with his friends, he will talk, he'll joke, he'll carry on. When you present him with a direct challenge, a direct question, or if he's speaking with a perceived authority figure like a teacher, an adult he's not familiar with, he is unable to communicate that way. So he also has an issue because of his Duchenne. He finds it difficult to write for long periods of time. His hands cramp up, the cramps in the muscles could cause long-term problems. So we don't like him to write with a pen for a long period of time. So there are some great tools that can be used to help people who are facing issues with that, who can't use their hands to type or to write, to scribe on paper, some really great tools that can be accommodating for them. For instance, this one. This is a tool that came on as a Kickstarter project a couple of years ago, the Hush Me voice muffler. It was originally designed for use when you're talking on your phone, so nobody can hear you when you're talking on your phone. You wrap this thing around you, you kind of look like Bane from the Batman movies with this wrapped around your mouth. And you can speak into it, and it can go to your phone or it can go to the computer, and you can talk away and nobody can hear you. So either one of my children could potentially use this to use dictation software and talk to the computer and get it to do the writing for them. Sounds great as an accommodation in theory, but what about that child's perspective? Would you like to be in a junior high classroom or an elementary school classroom and be the only child wearing something like this around your face? Or would you like to be the only child in your junior high classroom who has a laptop on your desk when the others don't, thus being singled out because you need to use that laptop? Sometimes when we bring in technological innovations to help our children be more included and more capable of doing their work, we're actually making the environment a little less inclusive for them, a little bit more difficult for them to feel included because of the stigma that's associated with being labeled as having a disability or being special and having that piece of technology that nobody else does. This is one reason why I was so extremely thrilled a couple of weeks ago when, just before the school year started up, the province of Nova Scotia announced that all students in grades 8 through 12 would be given a Chromebook to use in the classroom. That way, if they ever ran into a situation where they had to shut the schools down, they'd immediately have the technology at their disposal to participate in some form of online learning. They'd have the technology at their disposal when they need it for working on work in the classroom, and they wouldn't have to share these devices, thus risking increase of the spread of COVID-19. Well, now that all of these children from my daughter's age and up have a Chromebook available to them in their classroom, or should in the near future, my daughter with dyslexia is not going to feel so singled out in her classroom if she needs to use it to help her with her writing and to help her organize her thoughts and get them on paper. One of the reasons why I like the idea of shoveling that ramp for everyone, as opposed to shoveling the steps for 90% of the students and having a ramp off to the side for the handful that need it. Put these measures in place and make them available to everyone. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Another inspiration that I've had with, and this inspiration, I've thought about this one a lot over the past decade or so, in fact, ever since I started doing my doctoral studies, was this TV show, this kids show, The Magic School Bus. Really great show. It was one of the foundational elements of my whole perspective of using mobile technologies in education. All children in Miss Frizzle's classroom had access to the power of the Magic School Bus and the adventures that it could bring them on. They all had this technology at their disposal that made it easier for them to access learning opportunities and to take them to the next level. Not just the child who might have found it a little bit difficult to walk, or the child who found it a little bit difficult to translate thoughts from his or her brain onto paper. Everyone had access to this and they all had fun doing it, and no child was singled out. That's That brings me back to this whole element of shoveling that ramp for everyone. We should be shoveling that ramp. There are certain things that we can be doing to shovel the ramp for all children using tools that we all use every day. They're not as onerous as you might think, and we should be doing them. Another perspective that I have, and that I think all educators should be starting to think of, we should stop thinking about the use of technology to create inclusive classrooms as a crutch. We shouldn't be thinking about the use of dictation software or Google Read and Write or something like that as some kind of crutch or some kind of support for children who can't do something. What we should be thinking of with technology is providing a menu of options for all students to choose from. Choose the option that is the best way for you to access the learning resources and to have your voice and to share your voice with your students and with your teacher and to meet those learning objectives. If we're providing that menu of options, no student feels singled out because they all have their power and they have their choice. And I do want to point out that there is absolutely nothing wrong. There's no element of it there being a crutch about wanting to use Google Read and Write or wanting to use a Kindle with some kind of voice software built in, or listening to an audio book instead of reading a book. Sometimes we're just more comfortable doing that. Sometimes it's more convenient for us. It's not a crutch. It can be every bit as effective. I do agree that some more research may need to be done in the area to see if there's any differences in effectiveness. But from all I can see, there's not. There's no crutch about it. And we should also stop thinking about offering all of these different menu options of different technologies and different media formats as an attempt to cater to learning styles for students. Learning styles do not actually exist. They are an academic myth. There is no scientific merit to supporting the concept of them whatsoever. And to think in terms of learning styles of being an audio learner or a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner, more so than any other kind, can be very detrimental and can pigeonhole your students. When you provide that wide range of tools, that menu of technology options to all of your students, then you're going to cater to their engagement. You're going to have them more engaged. You're also going to give them more options to have a voice and to be able to feel as included and participate as possible. So how can we actually overcome some of these barriers? How can we actually make an inclusive environment? I'm going to look at two different infographics that I have shared over the past 2 months since we've done this transition to online teaching and learning because of COVID. One of them is a rapid transition to online learning infographic. Now, I'm not going to come at it from that perspective of we're all doing a rapid transition to online learning, but there are some key points in there that I want to look at. The other one is my digital accessibility cheat sheet that I put together. I believe it was Sandra actually asked me for some resources on that, and I had some students looking for them as well. So I put together this little infographic that I could quickly and easily share of some of the most common things that I find myself doing using technology to make my resources as inclusive as possible for my students. When we're making our learning resources, learning materials for our students, we want to provide a range of different technology levels, a range of different alternatives for our students. We want to make sure that we have those low-tech options as well as the higher tech options. The higher tech options might have more fancy bells and whistles and might be more catching and engaging looking on the surface, but we may have some students facing socioeconomic issues. We may have students who face an issue like I did just a little while ago where their internet craps out on them and they can't connect for some reason. Having a low-tech option as well as a high-tech option just gives you another inroad and just makes life a lot easier for everybody. You don't have to worry about creating new resources and reinventing the wheel all the time. You can look for resources that exist. And I'm not really here to talk about pre-recording new materials, but I will in a little bit point out a couple of tips that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing that. Communicating with our students. Again, have that low-tech option, have some printable resources for them if we're dealing with students who are isolated from us because they're doing online learning options. Have some kind of printable or mailable summary that you can send out to them, not just the technology-enabled option. Have some kind of low or common text solution that anybody can use to connect with you, not just a high text solution. It's far more inclusive for a broader range of our students and their families to know that there's a phone number where they can reach us. Not everybody has a computer, not everybody has internet access. Most people can get to a phone at some point or another and connect to you that way. Here's where I really want to focus though. When we're talking about our flexibility with creating activities for our students to participate in and assessments for our students. Again, have that menu of options, multiple ways for them to complete and submit their work. If I have multiple ways, if I was going to traditionally give my students some kind of written 5-paragraph essay to do, and instead I say, you know what, you can handwrite it on paper, you can type it up, you can use drag and dictate if you want to talk to the computer and connect it. Or maybe you want to record a short video of yourself making your argument, your 5 key points. Give them lots of different ways to do that. Maybe you have students who are camera shy. You have an assignment where you traditionally get them to do a video report or a video presentation to you for an online learning scenario. Well, some students, like my son, may not want to appear on camera and may not want to have their voices heard. Give them some other options. Maybe they could create a comic strip, or they could create an animated video using Powtoon instead and have the comic characters speak to you and make the points. There's lots of ways that we can accomplish the same objectives and use the technology to let our students have a choice as to how they're going to meet those objectives for us. And if we're focusing on authentic problem-based assessments for our students, it makes it much easier for us to do that than if we're focusing on traditional tests that have correct and incorrect answers. The biggest fear I know that many of you and many colleagues who I've worked with have, when I present them with alternatives like this, when I tell them that they should be as accommodating and flexible as possible, bring in as many tech options, that big menu of options as possible, I know what the biggest fear is. You're afraid of the technology itself. You're afraid of not knowing how to use those tools and then stumbling over it, trying to include them all for your students. Well, one thing I'd like to tell you is don't be afraid of it. We're not going to be masters of every tool that's out there. I'm not a master of every assistive technology that's available. I'm not a master of every single tool that I could get my hands on to make my online courses as accessible as possible. What I do try to master is thinking about what it is I want my students to do. And oftentimes I will let my students come to me and tell me what tools would work for them and to run ideas by me as to how they would like to meet those objectives using technology. And I'm just there as more of a coach and more of a facilitator. And I don't need to know all of the tech. All I need to see is that final product or where I can turn to help if I don't know the tech. So for instance, at our university, if I don't know how to use Respondus to run an exam, I know I can connect with someone like Terry at our Center for Teaching and Learning. He can give me a hand with that. Or if I don't know where to find the best new software tools for helping students who have reading issues because of dyslexia, I know that I've got a colleague named Sandra who is a little bit more knowledgeable about this, and I can connect with Christine or anybody at Dyslexia Canada. I can find those tools, I can find the answers. I'm not going to be afraid of trying to accommodate that technology for my students. So how can I make you all a little bit less afraid of some of this technology now? Well, I'm going to take a look at some of the items on my digital cheat sheet that focus on tools that we use every day, that all of us use when we're using technology. These are like Word documents and PDFs, or PowerPoint presentations, or pictures that we share with our students, either online or in our documents, or videos. Maybe we ask our students to watch videos, we share videos with our students. These are very common tools, but it's also very common that they're inappropriately used for creating that accessible, inclusive environment for our students. So let's take a few minutes. I'm gonna go through each of these one by one, show you a few little tricks and tips about how to make them a little more accessible for you and for your students. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy when I'm going through each one of these points here to try and figure out with you, or to show you if I already know, how to make things a little bit more accessible. So We're talking about documents using Word, using a learning management system, using Google Docs, using Moodle, Brightspace, any of those tools that we're using. There are certain things that we can do with those documents to make them as accessible as possible. One of those things that we should be doing is making sure that our documents are machine readable. So if they're machine readable, that means you can use Google Read and Write, or you can use JAWS, or you can use some other screen reader application, and it will properly read that document out to you. If it's not configured to be machine readable, it's going to be a nightmare for you to use a computer to read that to you. One of the easiest things that we can do is make sure we use proper heading structure with documents that we're creating. Properly tag something as a title or as a heading 1 or a heading 2. Why do we want to do this? If I'm using Google Read and Write, or I'm using JAWS to read something to me because I have a visual issue or I have dyslexia and I can't, it's difficult for me to read something on my screen, my computer will allow me to navigate through the document using those headings. All I need to use is my keyboard or a digital switch or something like that. I can go from heading to heading to heading until I find the section that I want to read, and then my computer will read it all to me. If I just manually format something in big, bold font and make it look pretty to make it into a heading, my software is not going to do that for me, and it's going to have to read the entire document to me from start to finish. I'm not going to be able to quickly navigate my way through the way most visual readers can by scanning it and looking for those titles. So we want to make sure that we have those headings in there and that we properly structure it. So another thing that we frequently put into our documents is images. Well, we want to make sure that if we're putting images in, again, that screen reader applications, digital screen readers, can actually properly interpret those images for our students who have visual issues. We want to make sure that we're not putting a lot of text in that is inside of an image, because that's not machine readable. And we want to make sure that we have something called an alt tag or alternate text on our images. This Google Read and Write, JAWS, any one of those applications, it's going to read the alternative text when it gets to it. So at least the student will have some idea of what is in that document, what's in that image, and what the main point of it is. You can also, with a lot of applications, tag an image as decorative. If it's just there as a heading, you can tell the software to ignore it so that it doesn't confuse your students. So let's take a look at inspecting some documents and making them a little bit more accessible. I'm going to take a look at how to do this using a Word document. I've got a couple of PowerPoint slides that I can take a look at this with. And I'm going to show you the same thing inside of a learning management system as well, how you can do these same simple things. They're not as difficult as you think, and how you can fix them yourself and how you can check to see if there's any issues with them. So let's do a little bit of a demonstration now. I'm going to stop sharing my slide deck for a moment. And I'm going to share another screen that I have. And I'm going to take a look at this document right here. Let's see if I can get this out of the way for you. All right, so this is an old paper that I wrote back in 2013. I've deliberately taken the proper formatting out of it. Oftentimes, we as teachers might create Word documents that we want to share with our students or save as PDFs to share with them. And we might make them nice and pretty, make nice big titles on them. You can see that if I highlight this here, I've got it in 22 font, it's nice and big, but under the styles it's tagged as normal. Same with my heading right here. So if I were to use Google Read and Write, I can't navigate from this heading to this one down here. It's gonna have to read all of this text for me. Well, there's an easy fix for that. I just need to take this, instead of manually changing my font size and my style, I just need to click on this title up here on the toolbar, and it's going to format it for me. If I don't like the style of the title, I can actually leave this as my style for title, right click here, update my title to match that. Now it's tagged as that. Any place that I tag as a title is going to look like that. Same with my headings. If I want my heading to look like this, right now it's normal. Heading 1, update, and I can go down here and I can find this one. I can do the same thing all the way through my document, and I can have subheadings like heading level 2, and I can have them properly tagged as a heading. One way that you can tell if this is working for you, if you've properly tagged something as a heading, is to try and put in a table of contents using the automated features, which, by the way, these tools were originally designed to do in Microsoft Word. They've sort of been co-opted by accessibility software. So this is a good test for you. You want to go to your, it is under references. You want to add a table of contents. You can pick any style you want, and you'll see it automatically adds it in for me. And if you can click on any one of these and navigate to that part of the document after you put it in, your digital screen reader application can also tab from heading to heading to heading, and your students can now navigate that document. So you've kind of made life a little bit easier for you in two ways. It makes it easier for those who don't need the screen reader application to access the document. It makes it easier for you to navigate a larger document. I've broken another rule here. I have a table put in which has a lot of text inside of an image. Well, this is completely inaccessible. There's no way to tell Google Read and Write or JAWS to read this out to the student. All this text is lost to them. So you should always try to avoid using an image to organize your text. If you do need to put in a text inside of an image, maybe some kind of infographic that you want to share, what you want to do is make sure you have an alt tag. You just need to right-click on the image, click on Edit the alt tag, and make sure that you have some kind of text here. This is what the software will read out to the student. So as long as there's something there, it will work. Now, I'm not going to mark this one as decorative. This is definitely instructional content, so I wouldn't want it to be marked as decorative. But if I did have an image, I have some more down here. Let's say this was a decorative image. It was just there to add some nice little picture for my students. I could click on mark that as decorative. A screen reader is going to skip that. So that's an easy way to make this document accessible. You can do the same thing inside of a learning management system. So I have a sample course here that I use for demonstration purposes. I've got some text in here. I've got some images. And if I hit edit on this image right here, if I look at the attributes of it, right now it's a decorative image. My digital screen reader will ignore that. If I didn't have that on there, it's going to tell them that there's an image there without any alt text for them. I'm going to leave it as decorative, no instructional content. It's going to skip that. I have this text here formatted as a heading, this as a heading, so my students can easily navigate from section to section until they find the section that they want to read. And it's the exact same process for formatting this in Google Classroom, in the Canvas learning management system, in Moodle, in Brightspace. Stick to the default font styles and just tag it as a heading if you want to have that accessibility. Oh, and speaking of fonts and text, by the way, also stick to the default fonts that are built into the system. So I have not specified any kind of special font here. Don't use something like Comic Sans or force a font on it. If I leave this as the system default, not only does it make our tech people at the university a little bit happier because they can use the corporate style guide and make sure that all courses look and feel the same, but without forcing a font on this for my students, if I was using software to view my courses where my browser automatically converted this text to a more friendly font for someone with dyslexia, then it's going to work. If I force a font on this for students, it might override that software and they won't be able to change this to a font that works a little bit better for them. Another tool that you can use, this works with PDFs, it works with PowerPoint. If you want your slides to be as inclusive, as accessible as possible, you want to check the reading order of everything so that if I'm using Google Read and Write here, it's going to read my slides in the correct order for me. Not this order that the slides appear in, but the content on the slides themselves. So I can check that myself by going on my home tab to the Arrange and just click the selection pane here. And if I click on everything, you can see it's telling me what order the software is going to read this in. And I do have a slide here where I have a number of things that I've done wrong on that. On it, I have, what slide is it that I've left inaccessible? This one here. So I've left this slide deliberately inaccessible. If I look at the first text box that's going to be read, it's going to be this one down here. Then it's going to go up to that. Then the software is going to read this and all of this. And I don't have any of this stuff properly tagged for students. If I look at my alt tags here, I have no alt tags in here for them. It's quite easy to fix this stuff. I want this to be read first. I'll drag that up first. I want it to read this image second. I can group these together as a single group of images and drag that second. Quite easy to do. Same with this one here. I can have it read this text next, and then this group of images. And I can make sure that each of these has an alt tag in it, some kind of descriptive text that's going to tell my students what this is about. Very easy to fix. I can also, in Word and in PowerPoint, there are tools built in that let you check and see if there's any major issues with your accessibility. I can just go to File, I can hit Check for Issues, and check the accessibility. So it's going to tell me all the things it's finding that it thinks are wrong on this. Now, I've gone through all the slides except for this one. There are no real accessibility issues. You do need to check some of this yourself and make sure that everything does have the tool, does have everything built in and configured properly, but it will tell you the things that you should be checking. You can also use these same tools and check for accessibility and for reading order with your PDFs once you generate them from a Word document. So if I were to take this document here now, save it out as a PDF, once I have all my headings configured and my reading order configured, it's going to create a PDF for me that's also machine readable for my students. All right, let me stop sharing this screen for a second, come back in here, and while I'm loading up the next screen, Sandra, do we have any questions coming through from anybody about anything I've gone through at this point?
I don't think so this far, Rob, no.
Okay.
Christine, is that correct? Yep, no questions.
Okay, so I've got my screen up here now. You should be seeing my slides again. Oh, my camera is right in front of it. Not very accessible for you. There we go. One other thing that I want to talk about with images and with text and with colors, I frequently see people creating videos or creating posters where it's really difficult to read the text against the background. To be as inclusive as possible, you want to have the strongest color contrast ratio as possible. You'll notice on my slide deck here, I have a very dark background and I have light text, and I use the same two colors for everything. Everything is white or this dark blue. I don't go for a light color text against a light background because that would be extremely difficult to read if you have a poor quality monitor or if you have a vision issue. If you have color blindness or any kind of vision issue, it may be very difficult to read that text there against the screen. And I have an easy tool that we can use to check that, which is called the Color Contrast Analyzer. It's a free tool. I'm going to show you now how that works. So I'll share my other screen again now. Oh, I've lost my sharing capabilities. No, there we go. All right, so let me launch my Color Contrast Analyzer. I've got this one installed on my desktop here. So it's a simple little tool. And I'm going to bring up my slides here. And I'm going to come on down to the slide that has that image on it. Here we go. So what I want to do is take my foreground color, which is my text, and I'm going to highlight it over this light colored text here. And I'm going to just take the eyedropper and test my background color. So it's going to tell me right now that it has failed the WCAG digital accessibility guidelines on all levels. The color contrast ratio is too low. If, on the other hand, I were to take this color text and this color background, you can see that it's passed on everything. So if you're creating some resources for your students and you want to make a visual resource, this is an easy way to tell if any of your students might have some issues with the colors that you're using. So this link, I believe Christine mentioned before we came on that she's going to share a copy of this slide deck when she puts the video of this webinar up. The link is in here on this slide. It's also on which slide? On this slide here. It's also going to be in the references, so you can get this tool if you want to. It's free, easy to use. All right. I'm back to my slides over here again.
Rob, you just want to be mindful of your time.
Absolutely. We've only got a few minutes left, so I am not going to go on to too many things. I do want to talk about making sure that we have video captions enabled for our students as well. Now, this is a fairly easy one. Most of us are probably not going to be creating our own videos. We're going to be using YouTube videos. You just want to make sure that you have videos. If you select videos that closed captioning is enabled, you can turn it on. You might want to actually watch the video you're sharing with your students and read those captions all the way through and make sure they're accurate to what's being said on the screen. Oftentimes, the automated closed captions for YouTube videos are not terribly accurate. So you just want to double check that. Why do we want to make sure that we have captions enabled? Well, obviously, if we have students who have a hearing issue, they're not going to be able to listen to a video. They're going to want to read it. But sometimes we have students who just would prefer to listen to a video or watch a video with the captions on and not hear it. Maybe they're in a crowded room where it's difficult to hear, or they don't have a headset. Maybe it's just easier for them to digest the key points if they can see the text on the screen as well. So make sure that we have closed captions with any videos that we pick for our students. And I was going to do a bit of a how-to demonstration on that, but I know we've only got about 10 minutes left, and that's getting a little bit advanced on how to create closed captions. So I'll skip the how-to demonstration there, and I'll just open up the floor at this point and see if we have any questions, and say thank you to all of you for listening to some of the strategies that I use with common everyday tools. Lots of different assistive technologies out there that we can use, but I like to focus. I'm not an expert on all of them. What I'm an expert on is using the tools that we use every day in the most effective way possible. So, do we have any questions?
Yes, so we have one. Is there a list of interesting assessment tools? You mentioned comic strips.
There are lots of lists out there of different assessment tools and strategies that you can use. I don't have any handy at the moment, but they're quite easy to find if you do Google search. And perhaps what I can do is spend some time searching for some of those tonight myself and tweeting them out. And you can find me on Twitter at PowerLearn, POWERLRN. So if you want to follow along there, I'll see if I can find any neat ones that I can share, neat lists that I can share with you. I will share one good one that allows students to have a voice though in a different way, and that's Flipgrid, one of my favorite tools. Sandra got to see the power of that this summer. I used it with a lot of my students to get them to do video introductions instead of discussion posts. But I've seen it used from kindergartners all the way up to higher education, and you don't need to appear on camera. You can actually have an avatar appear instead, and you can get automated closed captions with the videos that students record.
So Rob, we do have a question here, follow-up one. You mentioned, when getting started in providing alternative materials, how much time should we plan on taking? It feels a bit overwhelming.
It does feel overwhelming. The first step that you need to take, first decision you need to come to for yourself is just to be open to accepting new tools and new ways of your students to submit things. You don't have to become a master of every piece of technology up front. What I suggest that we master at this point is just some of these simple things that I demonstrated today with using Word documents and PowerPoints and things and images and things like that, making sure we take those basic steps that will make life easier for everybody. When it comes to the fancier tech, the higher end stuff, don't worry about mastering that up front. Some of your students will come to you with new pieces of tech and you'll learn from them how to use it. Or some of your colleagues may. You don't have to be a master of it up front. If I want my students to give some kind of a presentation and one of my students was to come to me and say, you know what, I'd like to make an animated video using software X that I personally have never used before, I'll just say, you know what, I'm open to that. Send me the link to the video when it's done and I'll give you some feedback. I don't necessarily need to know all the bells and whistles or how the tool functions. I can learn along with them. Sometimes I've helped some of my students figure out how to use software that they never have before and that I never have, but I didn't have to think about that in advance. Just be open to those different options. You as an instructor or as a teacher are the one who sets the objectives that we're aiming towards and sets the conditions for meeting those objectives. So just open the door up for your students to suggest some alternatives for you.
Rob mentioned earlier about Flipgrid too. I think for classroom teachers, that's a really easy place to start. It's very accessible. I taught it to myself in a couple of hours. And then the other nice thing about it was that students also, as we went along, students also taught me additional things. So I didn't feel necessarily that I had to be the expert. I introduced it and then students ran with it. So another question we have, Rob, is how do you bring parents or guardians along this important path?
It can be challenging. It depends on the circumstances that of the parents or guardians who you're working with. Some of them may not be as technologically savvy as you or the students. Some may be more so. Again, like working with your students, I just would keep myself open to listening to the challenges that they are facing as individuals. Like I said, you don't want to think about the barrier they're facing first. You want to think about the individual first and then work with them to overcome a barrier. So if you know that you have parents, or even if you don't know that you have parents who have technological challenges or socioeconomic challenges, don't have access to the higher end tech, as long as you're making sure that you have those lower tech options for connecting and for sharing, and that you have that range of options available, it opens up those doors for them. Have a phone number available where they can call and share when you're going to be available at that phone number, when you're willing to take calls or able to take calls at that number, so that they don't feel frustrated and lost, wondering, as even I frequently do with my children's teachers, how do I get a hold of Alex's teacher and find out how he's managing going up and down the stairs at school? How do I get a hold of my daughter's homeroom teacher and find out, does she have access to her Chromebook at school yet? You know, as long as they know that they can contact you by phone or by sending you an email or a text message or whatever it is that they're comfortable with, and that you have a time when you are actually going to be checking and responding to these things, that's a way that you can bring them along with this. And you know what? If I don't know a piece of technology and a parent does, I'm quite happy to let that parent and that student teach me how to use that technology. Teaching can be a two-way street. We're all lifelong learners. And this is one of the reasons why I have such a varied toolkit of digital tools at my disposal, because I have picked up so many cool tools from some of my education students over the past decade or so.
Okay. I want to thank Dr. Power. Rob, as always, it's my pleasure. I learned a lot. I've got 2 pages of notes here for things I want to explore. So thank you for that. I also wanted to thank our audience members for making time in your busy schedules. And I'm super grateful to Dyslexia Canada for providing us, for Dr. Power and I, this opportunity to speak to you about this very important matter. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Christine. And thank you, everyone.